The dining room smelled like cinnamon and burnt sugar, and there were 12 chairs at my parents' table that night. 12 place settings. 12 cloth napkins folded into little fans, the way my mother always did them for company. Not one of them was mine. I stood in the doorway in my coat, snow still melting off my shoulders, and my mother looked up from the gravy boat and said, flat, like she was reading off a grocery list, "We just didn't think you'd actually come this time." I didn't say anything back. I unzipped my coat slowly, hung it on the hook by the door, the same hook I'd used my whole life, and walked to the front hall closet, where I'd left a folding chair and a place setting of my own 3 days earlier, wrapped in a grocery bag, just in case. What none of them knew yet was that the 13th place I'd actually planned for that table wasn't mine at all. It was for someone in uniform, and he was already on his way. Welcome back to Home of Secrets. I'm Helena, 36, a financial crimes investigator from Cleveland, Ohio. This is the story of the Christmas Eve. My family forgot to set me a place at the table, and the one place I'd already reserved that they never saw coming. If you've ever been the one who keeps a family standing while getting treated like a guest who wasn't invited, stay with me. Drop a comment when you get to the part with the credit file, and subscribe. It's about to get a lot colder than the weather outside. I was 9 the first time I noticed the chairs. Curtis, 2 years younger, got a chair pulled out for him at every holiday meal before anyone sat down. My father's ritual, performed like a small coronation. I got the chair that was already there, wherever it happened to land. Nobody pulled it out for me. I don't think anyone noticed they weren't doing it. I noticed. I brought home a county spelling bee trophy when I was 11, second place out of 200 kids. My mother put it on the hallway shelf behind a candle that was never lit and never moved again. The same year, Curtis got suspended for fighting at school, and my father took him fishing the next weekend to talk it through, like the suspension itself had earned him something. I worked 2 jobs through college, graduated with a 3.84 GPA and 0 debt, because I'd planned for it since I was 16. Nobody came to my graduation. There was a scheduling conflict, which turned out to be Curtis's intramural softball championship. When Curtis dropped out of community college after 1 semester, my parents called it taking time to find direction, and bought him a truck so he could get back on his feet. I still have the spelling bee trophy. It's in a box in my closet now, the little gold figure permanently tilted because nobody packed it carefully when my mother finally cleared that shelf years later. I kept it anyway. Proof, I think, that I existed in that house as something other than the one who didn't need managing. By 29, I had a stable career, a mortgage I could actually afford, and a quiet, specific talent for tracing where money goes when people don't want it found. It's the kind of skill that's invisible until you need it, and for 7 years, my own family needed it constantly, without ever calling it what it was. It started with my parents' property taxes, $2,900, the year their fixed income stopped quite covering fixed costs. I paid it, without being asked twice. Then, it was my mother's gallbladder surgery copay, $4,600, because insurance was complicated, and somehow it was always more complicated when it came to actually filing the paperwork. Then Curtis's first emergency, $6,000 for a truck repair that turned out years later to have been a poker debt, with a friend who didn't take checks. By year 5, I was covering Curtis's rent twice a year on average, his car insurance for an 18-month stretch, and both of my parents' property taxes every December like clockwork, $1,450 a month, folded quietly into my own budget under a line item I labeled, with the kind of dry humor only an auditor would find funny. Strict family, recurring. By the 7-year mark, the running total was $94,300. I know the number exactly, because tracking exact numbers is, professionally, the entire point of my life. The small humiliations kept pace with the money. At my cousin's baby shower, my aunt introduced me to a stranger as the one with the boring job, very responsible. At my grandfather's funeral, my mother thanked Curtis publicly for always being there for everyone. The same week, I'd quietly wired him $1,200 to cover a payment he'd missed. If you've ever paid for a family's stability and gotten called the difficult one for noticing it, you already know exactly the math I'm describing. It isn't generosity, once it has no end date. It's just unpaid labor with extra guilt. That Christmas Eve, I drove 40 minutes through light snow with a green bean casserole I'd made myself, the way I had every year for a decade. I knocked. My mother opened the door, looked almost surprised to see me, and said the line before I'd even gotten my boots off the mat. "We just didn't think you'd actually come this time." 12 place settings. 12 fan-folded napkins. Not one for me. I stood there long enough to understand it wasn't a mistake. My father didn't look up from carving. Curtis was already seated, scrolling his phone, not even pretending to notice. My aunt, my uncle, 3 of my parents' neighbors, none of them said a word. The silence in that room was its own kind of answer, the 12 of them deciding collectively and instantly that the safest thing to do was nothing at all. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why. I walked to the hall closet, pulled out the folding chair and place setting I'd brought just in case, because some part of me, after 7 years, had stopped expecting otherwise. Set it up at the end of the table myself, and ate exactly 4 bites of green bean casserole in total silence before I stood, thanked my mother for having me, and left. What none of them knew was that 2 days earlier, at work, a flagged account had crossed my desk with my own name on it. I hadn't said anything about it yet. I wanted to see, first, whether they'd even give me a chair. The Monday after Christmas, I did what I do for a living. I traced the money, then I stopped it. I canceled the automatic transfer that had covered my parents' property taxes for 6 straight years, $1,450 a month. Gone, effective the next billing cycle. I called Curtis's auto insurer and removed myself as the secondary payer on a policy I'd quietly been funding for over a year. I sent 1 email to each of them. No accusations, no history. Just, effective January 1st, I will no longer be covering these expenses. Please arrange alternate payment. The kind of language I'd used to notify a vendor their contract had lapsed. That night, I opened a case file, not metaphorically, an actual file, the kind I build professionally, and labeled it strict, personal. 7 years, transfer dates, amounts, totals. Not for revenge, because I needed to see the full shape of what I'd been carrying, the way you can only really see a debt once you've written it down completely. $94,300. unreconciled, in 12-point font, against 30 years of folded napkins that were never for me. By mid-January, the story moving through my extended family had nothing to do with money. My aunt called it Helena, finally showing her true colors. My mother told a neighbor I'd abandoned the family over nothing. Curtis posted something vague online about people who think they're too good for the people who raised them, and 6 relatives liked it within a day. I didn't respond. I kept building the file, bank records, transfer confirmations, the auto insurance paperwork, all of it dated and organized the way I'd present evidence to a prosecutor, because some instinct in me already suspected I might need to. I didn't defend myself publicly, because I've learned, professionally, that a documented record outlasts a narrative every time. You don't win against a story. You outfile it. The only message I got that whole month that didn't accuse me of something arrived from my work partner, Priya, who simply texted, "You've been quiet. You okay? No pressure. Just checking." The flagged file landed on my desk the week before Christmas. A routine fraud review. 2 credit lines opened 18 months apart, both under my name, both with a billing address that wasn't mine. I almost passed it to a colleague before the account number caught my eye. It was mine, or it was supposed to be. 2 credit lines, $31,600 combined, opened using my Social Security number and a forged signature that wasn't even a particularly good forgery. Curtis had never been careful about anything in his life, including this. The billing statements had been quietly redirected to my parents' address for over a year, which meant my parents had seen them, which meant they'd known. I brought it to Priya first, off the record, before I touched it through any official channel. She walked me through every step I already technically knew, but couldn't think straight enough to apply to my own name. "You report this exactly the way you'd tell anyone else to report it," she said. "No different just because it's family." So I did. I filed an official identity theft report with my bank's fraud division, not informally, not as a favor, but through the same channel I'd guide any other victim through. I filed a police report the same week, with documentation Curtis himself had been sloppy enough to leave a paper trail for. The forged signature, the redirected statements, even a text from Curtis to my mother, subpoenaed later. That read simply, "She'll never notice. She's never home for the mail anyway." Curtis called me 9 times in 5 days. The calls moved from confusion. "It's not that big a deal. I was going to pay it back." To anger. "You're really going to do this to your own brother." To a final voicemail, half apologetic, half furious, that ended with him hanging up mid-sentence. I didn't call back. I prepared instead. I confirmed with the detective assigned to the case that an arrest warrant for Curtis was being processed, and that, given the amount and the cross-state nature of one of the credit lines, this would likely be charged as a felony rather than a misdemeanor. And then I did the one thing that wasn't strictly procedural. I called the precinct nearest my parents' house and asked, politely, whether an officer might be available to stop by their address on Christmas Eve to formally serve notice of the warrant, given that Curtis would, predictably, be there for dinner. They said yes. I bought a 13th place setting that week. Cloth napkin, full setting, the kind my mother always folded into little fans, and packed it in my bag for the night. This Christmas Eve, I came back. 12 place settings again. None of them mine. My mother hadn't learned a thing in a year. I didn't say anything about it. I simply set my own folding chair at the end of the table again, exactly like before, and waited. The knock came at 7:40 p.m., right between the ham and the pie. My father answered it, confused, then went very still. The officer asked for Curtis by name. My mother stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped. "What is this? What did you do?" she said, looking at me, not at Curtis. "I didn't do anything," I said quietly. "I just stopped paying for the things I never agreed to pay for. The rest did itself." Curtis stood in the doorway in handcuffs, repeating the same line he'd texted my mother months earlier, without realizing I now had it in writing. "She'll never notice." I let that sit in the room exactly as long as it needed to. My mother started crying. My father sat back down without saying anything at all. I picked up the 13th place setting I'd brought, walked it to the front hall table, and left it there, neatly arranged, untouched. "I reserved a seat for someone tonight," I said. "Just not who you'd expect." Then I got my coat off the hook and left. Curtis pleaded guilty to identity theft and fraud 4 months later, sentenced to 18 months probation, restitution of the full $31,600, and a felony record that ended his hopes of the contractor's license he'd been chasing. My parents, facing their own scrutiny for knowingly receiving the redirected statements, settled a separate civil claim by repaying $12,000 of the original total case, money I donated in full to a financial literacy nonprofit, because keeping it felt like it would cost me something I wasn't willing to spend. I stopped paying my parents' property taxes entirely. The house, no longer subsidized, sold within the year. They downsized to a rental across town. What I gained wasn't revenge. It was Priya's family, who invited me to their own Christmas Eve dinner that same year. An actual chair, pulled out before I sat down, the way my father used to do for Curtis and never once for me. And Mrs. Adelman, my elderly neighbor, who'd noticed my porch light off too many nights that January and started leaving soup on my step until I finally knocked on her door to say thank you in person. We've had dinner together every week since. I still have the spelling bee trophy. It sits on my own shelf now, in front of the candle, lit. It's been a year. I have a chair that's mine wherever I sit down now, because I stopped waiting for someone else to pull it out for me. Family isn't the people who set the table. It's the people who save you a place at it. If you've ever shown up somewhere and found there was no room for you, you already know the rest of this story wasn't really about a chair. It was about who finally noticed I was standing there. If this meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it. Comment below. And subscribe. There's more where this came from.